All right, hello everyone. I think we'll wait just 30 seconds or 1 minute before we get started. I see a few attendees still trickling in. So let's plan on starting at just 12:01 or until y'all get tired of looking at my face. Well, let's go ahead and get started. There's a few trickling in, but luckily these are recorded. So even if folks come in late, they can view that afterwards. So welcome everyone to the third week of the UAA virtual conference. We're excited to have you all here. Today's presentation is entitled Building Belonging for Your Students, Steps You Can Take to Develop a Learning Community. And I'm proud to introduce our presenter, Morgan Sipangnam, presenting. If you have any comments or questions, you can put that in the Q&A and we'll both help kind of monitor that as we go along. So feel free to ask questions throughout and Morgan might ask those as we go along. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Morgan. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. As Daniel said, my name is Morgan Sipangnam, and I am an advisor at the University of Utah. And so let's get started. So if there is a delay from like when I'm talking to when you hear me, and so I have not put like questions throughout for you all to respond to and engage with me. So what I would ask is, either if you're somebody who wants to like save all the questions to the end, please do so. There will be a time at the end of this presentation to ask questions. But if you have a question that just pops up in the middle of my slides, please just go ahead and put that in the Q&A, the chat box, and I will answer it kind of as we're going through. There's going to be like a lot of steps through this presentation of like how you can develop a learning community. And so I just want to make sure that you get those answers so it kind of makes sense as we go through. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go through an opening, the learning objectives of what my hope is that you get out of this presentation, and then the steps to developing a learning community. So that's going to go from success course that we developed, identifying the need of this learning community, the learning community itself, developmental steps. So, you know, who did we talk to? How did we get this all figured out? Some assessment results that we saw, and then some closing remarks. So a lot to get to for sure. So the learning objectives of this presentation is my hope is that you'll leave this session with tangible steps and a plan to execute your own learning community in your program or your department. I want you to be able to describe at least one benefit of constructing a learning community. And then my hope is that you gain ideas on how to create a seminar associated with a learning community. So whether you have a one-credit seminar already or you have a course or workshops, my hope is that maybe, you know, sharing some of my ideas of what our success course look like, that you'll be able to refine yours or add some ideas to yours as well. So a little bit of my journey on how I got to where I was, I think it provides some good insight. So I have a bachelor's degree in secondary education. I wanted to be a high school science teacher and then decided I like college students a little bit more. And so I've always had a passion for teaching. And so when I was looking for an advising role, I was really hoping to have that teaching component of the role. And a lot of the jobs that I was looking at, either, you know, some do, some don't. And so when I went to get my master's degree in higher education and student affairs, I worked in an academic success center where I was an academic coach, as well as like worked with a program called supplemental instruction. It's a program where leaders teach students in big groups, supporting content of the courses that they're in. And so I gained a lot of skills and knowledge of, you know, exam preparation, time management, study skills, all of those things during my time in graduate school. After that, this job that I have here at the University of Utah is my first job out of grad school, and I am an academic advisor for undergraduate students in mechanical engineering. When I initially took the job, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, there was actually no teaching component of this job, but there was promises that that could be something that we could move into moving forward. And so that's kind of where this journey to creating a learning community started is in conversations and hiring, I expressed that I wanted to teach, and then we were able to really make that happen. So the first step of developing this learning community as part of our department in mechanical engineering was to create a first-year seminar. So in the mechanical engineering department, there was no seminar course. So any student that was a pre-major or starting in major classes, there was no introductory course for them. Sure, there's like ME 1000, which is our, it's like a team-based course where they're learning engineering fundamentals, but there wasn't a seminar course. And so our hope was to develop something, and this is our first step to doing a learning community. The course itself that we developed is 1 credit. It meets 50 minutes once per week, and it's open to pre-majors and full majors status. And so the course objectives and the reason why we developed it was similar to maybe some seminars that you have heard of or that you currently have in your major. And so our hope was to assist in the transition to the University of Utah, to provide insight on navigating campus groups and offices across campus. We wanted to bring in ME faculty as well as build relationships with them as advisors and campus partners and ME staff. We didn't really have a place where students could learn about the career options or research or what graduate school would look like or emphasis options in mechanical. There's no place besides, a 30-minute one-on-one appointment once a year to talk about these things. And so we wanted to make it comprehensive. We also added professional etiquette, time management, money, and study skills. So some life skills that we all say, like, why don't they teach us this in college? We added those kinds of things to our course as well. And so you'll see here that this is what our class schedule looks like. So there's some things in here that when we were developing the course and hoping to get it approved, that the faculty had some opinions on what needed to be in the course. And so some of that is sprinkled throughout the curriculum of what they really wanted to see. But others of what we developed in the course is what we saw from other seminars at the University of Utah, some things that I saw at my previous institution, emailing colleagues, things like that. So we really wanted to hone in on time management, exam prep, and study skills in that first part of the course to really help students, jump into the difficulty of engineering pretty quickly. Because as we have all seen as advisors, right, it can be a huge step from high school to college for students. And so we start off with some study skills. We then add some life skills and some involvement, as well as we start introducing them to the major. We do make sure that students know when they are signing up for this course that they're not just gonna I'm not a mechanical engineer, as you could hear by my journey. So I'm not gonna teach them mechanical engineering, but I will expose them to things that kind of show them what mechanical engineering would be like. Our students complete a Strengths Finder test that is included in their fee. They talk about the BSMS program. The University of Utah, we have required mandatory advising, and 1 week of the class is they will fulfill that. So this is a way that we could justify, adding this course to our advising loads, was to say, yeah, we're going to knock out 20, 30, 15, however many students in 1 class that we would have to have met with individually. So that's what the course looks like. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that we developed this course in 2019. And we went through a few renditions and shuffling of syllabi and things like that until we actually brought in the learning community in fall of 2020. And so we anticipate that the learning community will only be offered in the fall, but the success course will be offered, both in the fall and the spring. What we found is that, our spring students are a little bit of a variety. So some students who maybe are sophomores or, obviously in their second semester of their first year. And then what we see in the fall semester is that's a traditional first year student that we meet with at new student orientation. And that's really where we promote this class. Sometimes we will get students who were in pre-major status maybe for a year and then enter that class in the fall, but a majority of those students are coming from our new student orientation. Each of our sections has ranged from like 10 to 20 students. We're looking into requiring this course as part of our curriculum. And so our next step of the course in general is to increase capacity. So COVID kind of threw some big restrictions this past year, but we're hoping that moving forward, we can get that course, those numbers a little bit higher to see if this is something we want to require in the ME curriculum. Okay, so that is information about the success course. So after all of our renditions of the success course, what we started to notice was that our students were learning so much in this course, but they weren't hanging out outside of the course, or they weren't building study groups together. And so while that's okay, one of the most valuable things that we hear from graduating students in our major is the study groups that they build and the camaraderie with their classmates. So what we decided to do was to create the learning community. And our hope for this was that we wanted to develop a sense of belonging in mechanical engineering. We wanted to demonstrate greater engagement in curricular and co-curricular interactions with students, faculty, and staff. We also wanted to increase academic achievement by utilizing study groups and study skills. So in our opinion, this was like a big step from what the success course was because they had multiple classes together. They were interfacing way more often. They still had that faculty component that the success course offers, but they were just together more often because of their course schedule. And so our hope was that we would identify that need that I mentioned earlier of hoping that our students would start to hang out and develop study groups together. So this is what our learning course looked like in fall of 2020. Our students would take a group of courses together. So they took Math 1310, which at the U is Engineering Calc 1. They took our Intro to ME 1000, and then they took the Success in Mechanical Engineering seminar. And so all of these courses are typically, we have a flow chart that we show students, and so these ones were really common. Sometimes students wait to take chemistry or they take it before, and so we found that these were the best ones for our students to take. This looks a little bit different coming into fall 2021, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You'll also see on here that the green square for ME 2960, that was what the course was when we were first developing it. And so actually in the past couple months, we've gotten it approved to have its own course number. So it went through our curriculum committees, and now the success course has its own course number. So the only students in that success course are the learning community. The only students in that ME 1000 lab are in the learning community. And then the early morning Thursday discussion of 1310, the only students in that discussion are in the learning community. So they're really interfacing with each other a lot. Most of them are in Chemistry 1210 and Chemistry 1215, which is just Gen Chem, and then they're in our Writing 2010. But in fall of 2020, there was no specific section that these students were registering for. Okay. So when we were thinking about doing this learning community, our faculty, if we decide to propose it for something that is a little bit more permanent, they're going to want to ask the research on why. And we also wanted to do some literature review on the best practices of why to have a learning community. And so learning communities provide students with opportunities to build a strong support system in college and are generally associated with increase in student engagement and interaction with campus systems. They can affect learning, and membership in learning communities appears to boost student engagement, in turn leads to a host of positive educational outcomes. And there is some research on like similar achieving friends and putting them all in a classroom together and separating academic and social networks in the process. And so this was kind of the research, and there's a whole reference page that I have that we kind of base this learning community off of, and decided, okay, yeah, it's just like not our idea that this is a good idea, but literature actually supports that it's a good idea. And so that was that. So these are our developmental steps on how we decided to go through the learning community and how we got it started. So as I showed you above, we identified the best courses for the learning community. So we wanted our students to engage in a lab together. And we wanted to have a place where they could, you know, not only just meet for 50 minutes once a week, because it's hard to build friendships that way, but we wanted a lab component where they'd actually be paired together and working together on a project. And so we also paired it with Math 1310 because it is typically a challenging course for our students because it just moves very quickly. And so a lot of our students are either enrolling in traditional calculus or calculus 1. And so we identified that this is a group of students that we could cater to and that the math department was willing to work with us on. We initially in fall of 2020 did not have chemistry as part of the learning community, but since then we have added chemistry. And so they will also be in a chemistry lab together, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the assessment. So as an advising team, there's 4 people on our staff, and we decided that this is what we wanted to do, and this was the next step from the seminar course. So after we thought it was a good idea, we met with our stakeholders. So we met with the chair of our department to see if he was willing for us to give up our time to dedicate towards developing this learning community. We met with our director of undergraduate studies to ensure that she was supportive of this and that she felt like it was a good idea. And then we also presented it to our curriculum committee. And so this was more of like, we had the seminar and this is what's going on, but we also prepared like some of that literature review that we did, as well as assessment results on how the success course was going. And so I would say with these stakeholders, this is where the value of the literature review was very helpful. Assessment on how successful the success course had been was extremely helpful. And then talking about what we had been hearing from students and how that was valuable. I would say like those were the main questions that we would get from those stakeholders of like, why should you invest your time in this? And having those things already prepared was extremely helpful. So the next step after we had kind of decided this is what we can do, we have the backing and support of the department, we met with the scheduler of our department to see if we could reserve an ME1000 lab. We had decided that that was the class that was going to be the most valuable for our students to be in. And so we were able to reserve one section. We picked the time that would work best. Obviously that like changed like 10 times with all of the COVID changes that we all went through last summer, but we made it and the learning community happened, so that's awesome. Then I developed a tentative schedule for the students. So I said, okay, so if they're in this ME1000 lecture and lab, this is what time we can put the seminar. And then I started to identify what math sections would work best for that. And so going into my meetings at the math department, I already had an idea of what would be the best section for our students. So I reached out to the math department about reserving a section of Math 1310, the lab/discussion of that class. And I got into a conversation with one of their faculty members. And it was actually a very interesting, engaging conversation with him. He was very curious on why we were developing it. I had to pull out some of those similar things that I had talked with the stakeholders about. And he was able to kind of tell me, okay, these are the sections we can definitely do this with. I don't think we can give you this whole lab, but I can give you this lab/discussion. And that's where the discussion of lab capacity and feasibility really came in. And they had a lot of stake, we felt like, in this learning community, because we really felt like that third class of math would add a lot of value to the learning community itself. And so after several emails, we were able to get a section reserved for just our students. And a big component of this that I was really able to advocate for was that our students were going to be in the class already, right? So it wasn't like we were increasing the number of students that Math 1310 were going to have. We were just taking a group of students who was going to be in Math 1310 already and just putting them all in the same section. So that was the next step. So once we kind of had this schedule set, I set up a meeting with the ME 1000 instructor, and we reviewed the syllabus together. I asked him about main assignments. I asked him for general tips for student success. And so I was teaching the seminar course that was associated with the learning community, and I found this extremely valuable so that I could insert these nuggets of knowledge into my curriculum and into what I was teaching my students each week. After meeting with the 1000 instructor, I emailed a different faculty member who was teaching our section of Math 1310 and asked for a syllabus. Literature reviews can take a while, so I completed the literature review on best practices and added some extra things. So I would say the first literature review I did was, okay, this is valuable, let's do this. And then as I kind of completed the literature review, it was more of, okay, what are some things that I can actually do to make this valuable? Like, what are some practices that I can add to make this valuable? And so that was really helpful for me as an instructor who was engaging with these students. After that, I adjusted the course schedule to align with other courses. So I moved exam preparation to align with their Math 1310 exam. So what I mean by that is, rather than teaching it a week after their first exam, I moved it a couple weeks before so that they could use some of the strategies. I also adjusted some of the study skills and was really able to talk them through, okay, like, this is what, you're learning in your math. You went through this section of math. How are you going to do that? Or with the exam prep, it's like, okay, from the start of this semester to when your next exam is, you all have covered this exact same comment. How are you going to prepare for that? And we have like a 5-day study plan we do with them. And so I found that extremely valuable in regards to the association with the seminar course and the learning community, is that I can really take those syllabi and integrate them into the success course. So this was all done, behind the scenes. The front-facing things for students, it was just promoting it at orientation. So I would say our biggest selling point was that if we heard a student was looking for community or nervous about COVID or nervous about some things, we would immediately point them to this class if they were eligible for Math 1310. If a student was interested in the class, they would fill out an interest Google form that we shared at orientation, and we would manually enroll those students in ME 1000, the success course ME 1800, and Math 1310. So we found that that was the easiest way to get them into these classes, because a lot of them were hidden from the schedule. And so what would happen is we would register them, we would send them an email and say, hey, you've been registered, go ahead and go add chemistry in a general education if you would want to. And I would say it worked fairly well for that to happen that way. Okay. I'm gonna pause for a second. If anybody has any questions about any of these developmental steps, please go ahead and put those in the live Q&A and I can answer them in a minute. So our semester started and we had 17 students enrolled, and the number 17 was very specific because it was what was allowed for COVID, first of all, and what the capacity was of some of those labs. So the math lab / discussion had said we can't go over 17. Our ME 1000 lab said, you know, we can't go over 18. And so all of the course enrollment was based off of those two things. And so once it was full, it was mostly not full because of the seminar being full, but more because of like just maximum capacity of classrooms, essentially. Okay. Awesome. So we were able to take some really important assessments, some more like forms and things, but some of the anecdotal assessments that we took that I noticed in the difference between the success courses that I had taught previously and the success course that was associated with the learning community is it was very obvious that there was a higher connection and camaraderie with the students. And it was very interesting teaching this class alongside my colleague who was teaching the other success course that's open for any students, no matter what their math is. You know, he would say like, yeah, you know, I can tell my students aren't really, you know, engaging outside of class. And I would say, oh yeah, all of my students, you know, they came in together, they were talking about their ME 1000 project. You could tell that there was like, they were a lot louder in class, which I think is a huge form that they're getting, like a huge sign that they're getting along. And they talked way more about their courses in class. And so it was really fun as an instructor to kind of see that they, you know, were all like, yeah, we've got this big math class coming out up. And like, you would hear them kind of say like, yeah, I'm nervous, this. And so that's not something I ever got in my other sections, because the other sections as a seminar course, you know, has anywhere from pre-calculus, college algebra, Calc 2, Calc 3. It can really be a wide range. I felt like I could make the material way more applicable. So as I stated earlier, it was huge to be able to say, you know, in your 5-day study plan, you know, how are you going to separate out this content that the faculty, that the professor is going to go through. And chemistry was mentioned a lot, like a lot. So that like in itself informed us to add chemistry into fall of 2021. And so based on like kind of what our chemistry department here is doing at the U for this fall, they're not going to be in the same lecture together, but they will be in the same lab together. So they'll be able to help each other out with that as well. Okay, so we collected pre-assessment, mid-assessment, and post-assessment throughout the class. And so these are some qualitative feedback that we got about the most valued part of being part of the learning community. So being able to teach others always reinforces your knowledge on the subject, as well as receiving aid from others. I liked being able to make real connections with people in my classes. It really helps me feel included and meet new people. Getting help getting help to get on the right track and finding things at the beginning of the semester. So this student in particular, I don't know if they answered this, but it brings up a story in mind, is he had missed his first chemistry class. And so he had come up to me and said, hey, I had something going on. You know, can I like, I'm just feeling a little bit lost in this chemistry course. And I was like, well, do you mind if I ask any of the classmates if they're in that section as well? So I was able to say, hey, is anybody in section 002? And I was able to find a few students and be like, are you willing to kind of catch him up and help him catch up on what he had missed? And they were able to get connected, which was really awesome. With COVID, it was great to get to know some people and faces, which might not have happened without the learning community. So I think this was extremely valuable in COVID. So I'm curious to see what will happen, whatever happens this fall semester. I'm curious of what the students will say. The ability to connect socially with others, interest in the same field, and share their same struggles was huge, that they had found a group of people. Awesome. Okay. There is a question in the chat that I'm going to answer before I get to this. So if they dropped any of their required courses, would they be removed from the learning community, or have you had relative success with students remaining in things? So luckily, none of our students withdrew from a class, but they would have, if they had withdrawn from a class, they would have stayed in the learning community. It's a little tricky because they can't be in ME 1000 unless they're in Calculus 1. So those are tied together. So they have to get special approval to withdraw from one of them. So I think that helps with that scenario. We didn't have any students withdraw. We did have a few students who did do the learning community, and then the first week they withdrew from the success course. And we said, hey, you have to be in this success course to be in these labs. But if you don't want to, that's fine. We just have to get you into a different lab or different section of a class. So we did have that happen, but no withdrawals or drops besides that. Great question. Okay. These are some other assessment results. So we compared, you'll see the reg is the traditional seminar course versus the learning community, says LC. So we asked them the same questions. So the darker teal is yes, and the lighter teal is no. So you'll see first and foremost, I hung out socially at least once with my classmates from ME 2960, which was the previous course number. The regular section, is pretty even. When that learning community, it was so much higher. With the regular section, I studied for at least one other class, not including this course, with my classmates is what that was. Again, it was even, but with the learning community section, it was extremely higher. So, comparing what our seminar course used to be, and still is, right? We do teach that every semester, and the learning community, we immediately saw the difference in those, just through this final assessment. We did ask them, taking the same course, ME 1000, Math 1310, and then the success course with my classmates, enhance my educational experience. We did get a good response with that as well. And then I plan to continue to work with the classmates I met in the learning community in future semesters, and we had a lot of yeses with that too. So overall, we're pretty hyped about how it turned out. So we hope that it continues to turn out well in future semesters. So this all happened in fall of 2020. So when we entered into spring of 21, we were trying to decide how can we still keep these students engaged and things like that. So we offer ME 1010 in your second semester. If you take ME 1000 your first, you automatically go into 1010 your second semester if you pass ME 1000. And so we created a lab section for the learning community again. So students could opt to be in the ME 1010 lab together. That was their only class that they could take together. I mean, obviously they could sit next to their buddy in the map class and build the exact same schedule. But we asked students, do you want to be in the learning community ME 1010 lab? 14 out of the 17 opted into that class. And so They were not the only ones in that class just because of lab capacity. It had to be mostly learning community and then a few other students. But they were all able to be in the class together again. And then myself as the instructor sent them curriculum reminders from the success course about 3 times throughout the semester. So in February, I sent them an email that said, hey, like, I hope your winter break went great. Like, here's a reminder of some of the tools that we use for time management. Same thing with exam preparation. And then in April, I sent them things to do over the summer. So reminding them to register for classes, maybe take some time to do some resume prep, maybe take some time to connect with the Career and Professional Development Center so they're preparing for some career fairs in the fall. We have not assessed how these things went, so more to come on those things. We were able to assess the learning community group that was in the ME 1010 lab. We compared their final assessment data with a control group, so another ME 1010 lab, and we compared these 11 things. So I feel a sense of belonging, I know how to utilize campus resources and things like that. And so there's not a huge difference, but you can tell that maybe there is a difference in our learning community students on their understanding of all of these things compared to a student who did not take the learning community and did not take the success course. And so this was a really interesting comparison to say, okay, yeah, our students think this is great. They think it's so helpful. What a great final assessment. Okay, let's see like if they actually did feel more prepared or feel like they learned more than a student who wasn't a part of this group. And so we really saw some changes in the knowing the career paths, research opportunities, and graduate school options. So it looks like they're maybe gaining some skills in some other areas, but they're not getting exposure to those things just in our curriculum in general. Okay, so some of our goals moving forward is to increase enrollment. Again, I think we'll have restriction with our lab capacities, maybe not as restrictive with COVID, hopefully somewhat going away. But I think, you know, dreaming big would be to maybe have multiple learning communities associated with multiple math classes because math is so valuable. Maybe increasing enrollment to have, you know, multiple scheduling options that they can choose, things like that. We would love to have some like socials or workshops in the following semester. So during that spring 2021, maybe rather than sending emails, we can engage them in, you know, like bowling or something like that, where we give them an opportunity to connect. We want to collect longitudinal data to see how these students do during their time here at the U compared to other students. We do have a peer mentor as part of the seminar course, and we've talked about creating more one-on-one interactions by hiring a second peer mentor because we found that's a very valuable part of the class. I said explore other math periods outside of Math 1310. I talked about that. And then our department uses a Canvas page to like send out announcements with all of our students in it. And so we've thought about creating a learning community specific group within that Canvas page where instead of sending emails, maybe we can just post to that page and they would see those emails or see the events a little bit easier. So those are some of our goals and ideas moving forward based on what we've learned this past fall semester. So I want to take a moment to, this is like the concluding slide of my presentation, and I left a fair amount of time for questions because I wanted to make sure that I could answer them for you. But I also wanted to take some time for you to reflect on everything I just covered because it was a lot of information and there wasn't a lot of time for breaks. And so these are the learning objectives. So while I describe these, go ahead and like put some questions that you have about the learning communities or ideas you've shared. And then maybe, pull up a Word document or write on a piece of paper some of the answers to these questions. So one of my goals was that you could leave this session with tangible steps in a plan to execute your learning community. So I want you to identify, what are 3 steps that you can take this summer to help you create a learning community or program in your office, right? Maybe this fall schedule is already posted, but maybe, you can start something in the spring, or you can talk with your curriculum committee. So write down 3 steps that you can take this summer to help you or your office create a learning community. My second learning outcome was learning objectives, was to be able to describe at least one benefit of constructing a learning community. So I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, we identified a need and we found that the learning community was the best way for us to meet that need at the given time. And so describe one way, like maybe write it out or type it out so that you can bring it to your colleagues of how could the learning community benefit your program or office. The final learning objective was to gain some ideas on how to create a seminar associated with a learning community. And so what would your success course look like? Do you have one already that you could pair with a learning community? And what changes can be made to it? So I'm going to pause for a second to let some questions come in. And I want you to think about these questions and write them down for a moment. So I'm just going to give it a minute or so for you to reflect on these things while we see if there's a couple of questions that come in. Okay, well, hopefully you're writing down some of the answers to these questions. We had one question come into the chat of what was the most challenging step in this process? I think if you don't have a seminar already, that was a very big project that took us a long time to refine. So I kind of think of these as 2 separate things for us, was the development of the success course and then the learning community. And so I think this development of the success course was huge and probably the most challenging step. If you already have a seminar created, the other part was getting the schedule ready and meeting with other departments. Because you kind of have you're talking to one person, but somebody else is doing the schedule, but so-and-so thinks this is a great idea, but they have to confirm with somebody else who has to confirm with somebody else. And then while you're doing all of that, you got to make sure that this lab doesn't fill up or things like that. So I started this process pretty early. So it helped with that for sure. But I think building the schedule itself and getting those labs reserved was pretty challenging. And math was really great to work with. It's just that I don't have control over their schedule as easily as I do the ME classes. So that was definitely a challenge. Yeah, we have another question that says, could you talk about the diversity inclusion component of the course that was in the syllabus showed what does that entail? Yeah, so this part of our course has gone through a lot of alterations actually. What we generally talk about is pretty lower level, some would say, things. So we engage the students in conversation about, what is diversity? What is inclusion? How would you define those things? It was very fascinating teaching, this is just an anecdotal comment, teaching it this fall versus previous semesters because the students were very much more engaged because of the movements that happened over the summer. it was very cool to have discussions with students about this. So what is diversity? What is inclusion? Why are these important topics? And then we had them reflect on their own identity. So, what are the identities that you think that you hold most value? What are identities that people might not see? The invisible. What are visible and invisible? And then once the students kind of identify their identities, then we kind of go through privileged identities and how that can play a role in their movement during their time here at the U. And then we conclude with how to be an ally. So if you have a lot of minoritized identities, and then so-and-so has so many privileged identities, if you have a lot of privileged identities, how can you be an ally to somebody who doesn't have a lot of privileges? And so we've kind of made some adjustments to that, but it's kind of a reflective activity of them kind of becoming aware of the privileges that they may or may not have, is kind of the essence of that course currently, that week of the class currently. And I'll also add, we used to teach it as like the last week, which maybe was in that syllabus I showed you originally. We no longer teach it on the last week because it's a very deep topic to end class on. So we've moved it up in the curriculum. We leave it later in the curriculum so that students are more comfortable with talking, but we don't leave it as a last subject so that we can still bring them back and maybe have reflective conversations the next week, or just have some time to connect after having some pretty deep conversations. Yeah, great question.
Hey, Morgan, if I can maybe ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
So I imagine some institutions may have these already in place, maybe under different titles like first year experience courses. Can you speak to any collaboration? It sounded like these learning communities were not only for these majors, but for other math classes as well. Did you have any other first year experience courses or any ways that you worked with others on campus to maybe integrate what folks are already doing or how you can work together, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I would say that collaboration was more of comparing, like learning from others. So there is currently no learning community in the College of Engineering at the University of Utah. There's also since we've developed ours, there has been a few developed in other departments in the College of Engineering. So I would say like those relationships were more of like us learning from them. There's some really good seminars, classes at the University of Utah that we were really able to gather some information from. In regards to like combining our core, like building relationships and interweaving the courses together, that did not happen as much. We did recently like learn about a first gen scholars program where basically we would say like, our learning community is great, but like this is also another great learning community option for you. There's also like several living learning communities that students can opt into and they can do both of, but we haven't quite built the connection with those offices yet.
Great, thank you. Now's probably a perfect time to end.
Yeah, thank you everybody. And there's my email if you have any questions, but thanks for coming to my presentation.
Yeah, thanks again, Morgan. Excellent information. And then just as a quick reminder, we will start our next hour at 1 o'clock. So y'all have 10 minutes before the next round of presentations. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Morgan.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.